Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unlocking Greatness podcast with Zenja Glass. If you did not listen to part 1 of the pruning season, go back and listen to that and then come back and listen to part 2. I'm reading from my book, Necessary. This particular chapter is titled The Pruning Season, and I'm going to pick up from where I left off. For those of you who may have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, I talked through a season in life when God began to show up in my life and cut away what was no longer needed. It was as if the good gardener showed up and began to cut away all of the branches, all of the things I thought was needed. And I had no idea that all along he was planting me in better soil. And his cutting away would in turn produce better fruit in my life, more fruit in my life, I should say. So I'm going to pick up where I left off from part 1, and this is part 2. I'm on page 64 for those who want to follow along. I ended the last segment with asking a question: is the pruning process really necessary? Now let's pick it up from there. As I pondered this question, I decided to conduct some research about the pruning process, specifically about grapevines, to get an understanding of how I could apply this passage to my life. The shortest conclusion from my research is this: pruning has to be done at the right time to avoid damaging or delaying the maturity of the fruit. If a gardener wants to maximize the crop, the branches have to be pruned to ensure it will continue to grow and produce ripe grapes each year. If the pruning process ever stops or is delayed for an extended period of time, fewer grapes are produced as a result. The more I researched the pruning process, the more I understood the wisdom of a good gardener and the importance of pruning the branches to produce more growth and, if I could dare say so, to protect the fruit. While this may not satisfy most naysayers, nor be the answer to every pain we have ever experienced, it can certainly help us to grasp the concept of being pruned to grow for the harvest ahead. The question we all must answer is, can we trust the good gardener? Can we trust that he knows what he is doing? Can we trust that he has prepared a harvest for us and he prunes us to produce his good will in our lives? Looking back, I realized I gave Satan way too much credit, because if any pain or discomfort occurred in my life, I always thought it was the enemy at work. I wasn't mature enough to consider if perhaps there were times the good gardener was simply at work, preparing me for the seasons ahead. I guess that's why the Bible teaches us to always rejoice in the Lord, and that's Philippians 4:4. Because we know that even in our suffering, God has plans to prosper us and not to harm us. That's Jeremiah 29:11. If you are in a pruning season right now, and the good gardener is cutting away in your life, please know you're not alone. God has not forgotten about you. Our Father is a very skilled gardener. He knows what he is doing, and even when you don't feel his presence, he sees you. He is with you. He is masterfully working it all out. My life is a living witness. The good gardener showed up unexpectedly and tore everything down. Every altar, every person I depended on, everything I thought I could rely on from my own strength, he tore it all down. It was only in my most challenging seasons of great uncertainties and sorrows that I began to grow from dark places, as he placed me in fertile soil and removed what was no longer needed in my life. I've come to realize there are some pruning processes we may never understand until we meet him on that great day in heaven. But I want to encourage you to hold on to his unchanging hands and trust the good gardener has not taken his eyes off of you. Trust that his eyes are on the sparrow, and he is aware of every single detail of your life, even the number of hairs on your head. And that's Luke 12:7. When you can barely hold on any longer, when your faith has weakened, and when you are tempted to feel that God doesn't care or that he can't relate to any of your struggles, always remember this important passage. And I quote, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things just as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let's approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace for help at the time of our need. That's Hebrews 4:15 through 16 NASB. As I reflect on my life, times of laughter and times of crying, times of prosperity and times of drought, times of answered prayers and times of waiting, times of ripe seasons and times of pruning, I realize the good gardener was always present. He's always at work, preparing us for the harvest ahead. His pruning strengthens us, develops our character, teaches us how to persevere, and produces harvest seasons in our lives that we may never experience if we remain unpruned by the good gardener. I'm going to stop right there. If you continue reading through the pruning season from my book, Necessary, it goes on to talk about a reflection that I wrote, and then there's recommended reading in here. And at the end of each chapter, as many of you all are aware, there are self-reflective questions for you to ponder on the passages that are mentioned, and questions where you can ask yourself just to have something to self-reflect on. I pray to God this message reaches the right person at the right time. Sometimes we go through pruning seasons, but the good gardener is always present, even when we don't feel his presence. And God knows there's been times in my life where I simply did not feel his presence. It's only in hindsight I'm able to realize the good gardener knew what he was doing all along. Someone said to me a long time ago, and I'll end on this, and I don't know where this person got this from, but it made sense to me. Said it doesn't matter the storms that come along in life or how big or great the storms may seem. As long as Jesus is on the boat, you're going to be okay. Even if it appears that he's sleeping in the stern, he's there. I want to encourage you all to know the good gardener is always present. I just read from my book, Necessary, and I pray that you enjoyed it. That particular chapter is called The Pruning Season. If you know anyone going through anything in life and you think they can be encouraged, I want to kindly ask that you get a copy of Necessary for them so they can be encouraged as well. I love you all. You're listening to Unlocking Greatness Podcast with Zenja Glass.